Good evening, America. Hello, Australia. It's Radio Toni with your host, Toni Lontis. Today we're broadcasting live from a different spot on the Gold Coast. Our home in Tallebudgera is without electricity this morning, which is making things a little bit flustered for myself. Hi to Rebel, and welcome back to everyone listening. If you'd like to follow me on social media, it's Toni Lontis on Facebook, and on LinkedIn, Twitter, it's Toni M. Lontis, and on Instagram, it's Toni M. Lontis. Today we have a wonderful guest joining us. Joyce Short is the Consent Crusader, and she will be joining us later today. But before we talk to Joyce, we'll just go over some world news. So in India, they're having an election like no other. Those eligible to vote in India's upcoming polls represent more than 10% of this world's population. 10% of the world's population. And they will take part in the largest democratic exercise in history. India is the world's largest democracy. And while they are in charge, India's economy is likely to overtake the United Kingdom's and become the world's 5th largest. Its population, meanwhile, of more than 1.34 billion people is predicted to soon surpass China's at 1.39 billion. That's a lot of people. Major concerns for this election include unemployment, and millions of farmers are angry about low crop prices. The nuclear-armed country engages with the outside world is a major consideration for all of us. It manages a tricky relationship with its neighbour, Pakistan, and it is of immense importance for international security. Because of the enormous number of election officials and the security personnel involved in the voting, it takes place in 7 stages between the 11th of April and the 19th of May. Votes will be counted on the 23rd of May and results expected on the same day. It's a lot of votes to count. Meanwhile, Australians will vote in the general election on the 18th of May. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, announced yesterday. The poll will decide whether the Conservative government wins for a 3rd term or is replaced by the Labor administration led by Bill Shorten. All 150 seats of the House of Representatives will be contested and half of the 76 seats of the Senate. The election is expected to be hotly contested in areas including climate change and economy. The election will be based on Australians and how we live, and there are a few key things including climate change that Australians are all interested in. Australia also, the first delivery service was launched in Australia after a few years of test flights. The parent company of Wing delivered takeaway food and coffee and medicines by drone to about 100 homes in America, 100 homes in Canberra. It's been testing the drones in Australia since 2014, but many residents had complained about the noise. The company Wing said the feedback obtained during the trials was very, very valuable and hoped to continue the dialogue. Australia's Aviation Authority gave Wing permission to launch a commercial service after examining its safety records and operational plans. It judged the company posed no risk to residents or other aircraft. So I'm guessing that we'll see drones delivering food in Australia very shortly. The Australian man accused of shooting 50 worshippers in the Christchurch mosque has been charged. And a listener is just saying, yes, the drones do make noise, but apparently the company Wing has been looking at how to diminish the noise from the drones. So let's hope they do that before it's formally brought into place in Australia. The Australian man accused of shooting 50 worshippers in Christchurch mosque has been charged with 50 murders and 39 attempted murders. Police have announced that fresh charges against the terrorist, who is due to appear in the High Court of Christchurch tomorrow. They said that some of the charges are still under consideration. The 28-year-old first appeared in District Court on the 16th of March, when on the 15th of March he killed 50 people in the Al Noor Mosque and the Linwood Islamic Centre. In the United Kingdom, Theresa May is waiting to hear the decision of the other 27 EU leaders who are discussing her request for a short delay in Brexit. The PM wants to know the UK's exit date before June 30, but the leaders are split over the length of the delay. The Brexit saga continues to drag on, and 17 member states so far in favour of a long extension, including Germany, while France wants a shorter delay. All the leaders have spoken and had a break, and they will now speak each for a second time. The EU member state that they need to reach a unanimous decision by law. In Latin America, hundreds of Hondurans have gathered in the city of San Pedro Sula, from where they plan to begin a journey of more than 4,000 kilometres to the US. Almost 1,000 people, police say, gathered at the bus terminal after news of a new migrant caravan spread. The migrants travel in large groups of safety to avoid being robbed, kidnapped, killed by Mexican gangs on the way. Thousands of migrants have made their way north, with previous caravans remaining stranded at the Mexican-US border. The migrants on the border, who are mainly from Central America, are awaiting US asylum hearings. US President Donald Trump has railed against the growing number of migrants coming to the US via Mexico and has called on the latter to stop the caravans. In the Middle East, Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu looks all but certain to stay in office after a record fifth term of his biggest election challenger, Benny Gantz. Almost all votes are counted. Both men's parties are neck and neck, but a coalition between Mr. Netanyahu's smaller right-wing and religious parties should form a 65-seat majority in the 125-seat Knesset. US President Donald Trump has already offered his congratulations. Mr. Netanyahu said that though they didn't win this round, though they've won this round, he is glad to be back in power. An FBI investigation into a dismantled $1 billion Medicare fraud scheme, one of the largest in its history, has been announced. 24 people, including doctors and owners of medical equipment companies, face charges of scamming disabled and elderly patients. What a sad indictment on our civilization when those in power can scam the disabled and elderly patients. Doctors receive kickbacks by peddling unnecessary back, shoulder, wrist and knee braces, authorities said. The gains were allegedly used to purchase exotic cars, yachts and homes. That just makes it worse. Authorities said the global conspiracy involved bribes paid to call centres in the Philippines and throughout Latin America. The investigation has been called Operation Brace Yourself. Durable medical equipment companies provided kickbacks to those telemarketing companies, which advised to Medicare beneficiaries and upsold them to accept several DME braces regardless of need. The telemarketers have allegedly encouraged patients to contact doctors by phone or video call in order to maximise efficiency. Doctors involved in the scam were then paid to provide bogus prescriptions for braces, despite having never met the patients in person. 2 shipping companies indicted in the investigation would allegedly ship low-cost braces made in China to patients, as the DME companies fraudulently billed Medicare for the cost. Again, what an appalling state where our powerful doctors and medical staff peddle their unnecessary wares to disabled and elderly patients. So before we go much further, I would like to talk today about our guest, Joyce Short. Joyce is known as the Consent Crusader. She's a sexual assault survivor and a TEDx presenter. And she's the author of several books on sexual assault, with her most recent release, Your Consent, The Key to Conquering Sexual Assault, has helped create rape law bills in 2 states and counting. It provides a meaningful solution to the issues raised in Me Too, and it's currently available on Amazon. So after the break, we'll join you with Joyce. I'm sorry, everyone. We're having a few technical difficulties today. I might... you there, Joyce?
I am.
Oh, wonderful. That's so fantastic. We've had a few technical difficulties this morning. I haven't had electricity at my home, so I've had to come into town to try and connect to radio today, so I'm terribly sorry. I'm so glad to have you here. How are you?
I am fine. How are you?
I'm good. I've been so excited about this interview all week, and I'm sorry we've had a little bit of a rough start.
No problem. Are we on air?
We are on air right now.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for going through all this trouble and effort.
Oh, it's no problem at all. It's always going to be a challenge trying to connect to Louisiana, Australia, and New York. But we've done it, and I'm so glad to have you here. So what have you been up to this week, Joyce?
Well, a lot of things. I've been working with some folks in Texas, and I want to give a big shout out to them, to Deborah and Maureen, who've been really hard at work trying to move our effort forward to get consent defined correctly in the laws of Texas. Actually, Texas has a definition for consent. They just don't use it for sexual assault, as bizarre as that
really?
seems. Yeah, it's really pretty odd. In fact, we've had boots on the ground there going to the precincts in an effort to report a couple of cases. We went to 5 different precincts, and they were told the same thing. Consent doesn't matter in sexual conduct in the state of Texas. That's not what they base rape on. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's concerning.
Yeah, that's one of the... It's very, very bizarre. And some other initiatives. I'm working with someone who was raped here in New York and is a student at Baruch University.
Yes.
And it's also another bizarre incident that because it's with the university, it's under Title IX, and we're having difficulty getting the folks at Title IX to be responsive. So
can you tell our listeners what Title IX means?
Here in New York, Title IX, or here in the United States, Title IX is the division in the school that deals with issues having to do with equality for women.
Right.
And I should say equality for everyone, not just for women, but for women and men. And when there are cases of abuse or cases of misconduct, they're handled under the Title IX office.
So
that's another.
Does that mean that the police get involved, or they have
the police can get in?
Right.
The police can get involved if the person reports the incident to the police. The school, however, also can get involved and will get involved. In fact, they're usually the first responders if something transpires on the college campus itself. Then it's often the campus police that actually respond, depending on where the university is located. But the Title IX people are there to make sure that the school does what they're supposed to be doing in regard to protecting their students.
Right. So across the US, why do you have so many differing laws on sexual assault? It seems to vary from state to state. Is that correct, Joyce?
It is correct, and it's also correct for Australia, Toni.
I wondered.
Yeah, you have common law in Australia. Your laws are actually a little bit better than here in the United States. In your common law, which is your federal law, you have a consent definition. It's actually just a partial definition. It's not completely correct, nor is it good English. Your consent definition states that consent is free and voluntary agreement.
Yes.
That's only partial. That's only really a partial statement about consent. Consent is first of all, that concept of free agreement. What is free agreement? There's no such thing as free agreement. There's freely given agreement.
Yes, it's missing the
and
given,
so they've
isn't
kind
it?
of left that. Yeah, they've left that word out, which is kind of odd. But it's freely given and voluntary agreement would be the correct way for the state of the federal code in Australia to express it. However, they're missing something that's equally important. It not only has to be freely given, but it has to be knowledgeable and informed. You have to know when you're agreeing the facts concerning what you're agreeing to. And if you don't know the facts, then you can't be consenting. You can be assenting, which means agreeing on the face of it, but you can't be consenting because you're not cognizant of what the facts are, and therefore you can't make an enlightened decision.
Yeah.
But
so essentially, sorry, Joyce.
In Australia, no problem. In Australia, the states also are very involved in determining what sexual assault is, and that varies from state to state as well. The state that is known as the toughest on sexual assault is New South Wales. In New South Wales, the strictest is Tasmania because they require active consent, where the parties must say or do something that communicates consent. But the problem with that is, even if you're communicating consent, if you're not knowledgeable and informed, or if you're being coerced or you're being forced, you could be giving active consent, do it and get it over with, but that doesn't really constitute consent. In New South Wales, they just passed recently a law that says that you must say yes out loud. So they're looking at consent in a very peculiar way. They're really not looking at consent for what consent is. They're only looking at that you should be expressing consent, but if they're not properly defining what consent is, what good does that do? So if you're not freely giving knowledgeable and informed agreement, then even though you say yes out loud, if you're being tricked into saying yes, or if you're being coerced into saying yes, or if you're being forced into saying yes, then that shouldn't constitute consent under the laws in any state or jurisdiction. Yeah.
So, Joyce, one of our listeners is asking, are we talking about needing a contract or something? And
no,
we're not
I get
talking
that all
about
the time.
we're not talking about needing a contract. But
that's just kind of silliness.
Yeah. So another listener is asking, what if we're forced to say yes out loud? It's still forced, though, isn't it? That's still not consent.
You're being expected to say. I don't know that if you're being forced to say consent out loud, then you're not consenting. Right?
No, that's right.
You're being forced. You're not freely giving. Right. If you're being forced to do something, you're not freely giving agreement.
That's correct. And it's about freely giving, isn't it?
Correct. It is, absolutely. Consent. It's about freely giving not only agreement, but knowledgeable and informed agreement.
Yeah, which can't happen if you're being forced to do something.
Exactly. 100%. And there's precedent for it. Model Penal Code. Now, you in Australia have what's called Model Criminal Code. Here in the United States, we have Model Penal Code. I guess they decided they didn't want to look like copycats, so it's basically the same thing.
It is
and
basically.
Under Model Penal Code, it has a consent provision. Because keep in mind, if you're stating what something is not, then you're really not defining it. So in information that is out there identifying what consent is not a definition of consent. It's a provision. And under Model Penal Code, it says that consent is ineffective. That means what it's not. If it's induced by force, duress, or deception.
Yeah. I like the word deception.
Yes. Now, if you turn that around to the positive so that you could actually have a definition, that's how you come up with it's freely given, knowledgeable, and informed agreement. Because if it's induced by force, then it's not freely given. If you're under duress and being coerced, then your agreement is not freely given. And if you're not knowledgeable or informed, then then that falls under deception.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If you're being deceived, you can't be knowledgeable and informed.
Yeah.
So stating that consent is freely given, knowledgeable, and informed agreement is just the turnaround. It's the positive way of stating Model Penal Code, which states it in the negative. Consent is ineffective if induced by force, duress, or deception.
So you've been successful.
I'm sorry?
So you've been successful in changing that wording to your wording, freely given, knowledgeable consent?
At this point, we're trying to make that happen, but we haven't succeeded in making it happen yet. Okay. And unfortunately, there are a couple of laws that I've been involved in moving forward recently, one of them in the state of Indiana, one of them in the state of South Carolina, which really just kind of piggybacked off of the incident that happened in Indiana.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw my TED Talk.
Yes.
Okay, so the first case in my TED Talk is about a young man by the name of Donald Ward, who tricked someone into thinking that he was her boyfriend. The room was dark.
Yes.
When she went to sleep, her boyfriend's arms were around her. Yes. He had climbed in bed with her. It was a bunk bed. And they fell asleep together. And actually, she fell asleep. He didn't fall asleep. And he was uncomfortable. Her dorm room was actually down the hall from him. And so he got out of bed and went down the hall to her room so that he could sleep comfortably without disturbing her. So she was asleep. He didn't want to wake her up and send her down to her room. He went down there himself. And then the next thing she knows, someone is groping her breast. And, of course, she thinks that it's her boyfriend because when she fell asleep, there was her boyfriend right there with her. And then that hand travels down her torso into her panties and engages her in sex. She gets out of the bed in order to go to the bathroom. Yeah. And when she comes back, she sees Donald Ward looking down at her from the bed, and he's smiling. And she looks up at him, and she just kind of bewildered. She doesn't get what's going on. Why is this? Why is Donald Grant Ward in the bed that she just left? So, in her kind of bewildered state, she decided she's just going to go down to her room. And when she walked into her room, she found her boyfriend asleep in her bed.
Oh my God.
And so the boyfriend and she and her boyfriend went down to the room, and Grant Ward was still there. And the boyfriend confronted him and said, "What did you do?" And he admitted to what he had done. He knew that he had tricked her. He knew that he intended to trick her. He knew that he was tricking her, and he admitted to what he had done. And they called the police. And he admitted it to the police as well. The police arrested him for rape.
Absolutely.
And in the state of Indiana, and he was tried and he was acquitted. Because in the state of Indiana, they have no definition of consent, and they have no rape by deception law.
Oh, dear.
So in the state of Indiana, he was acquitted. Not only was he acquitted, but his his background, his criminal record was expunged, which means it's no longer in existence. So there is absolutely no criminal record for this man. And I was working very closely with the Honorable Sally Segrist, who is the state representative, and she's the in the House of Representatives for Indiana, and she was really very adamant about wanting to pass a law. But unfortunately, the reason that we have this problem is that legislators are loath to get involved. They're really loath. Everybody knows. I mean, I don't think that it's rocket science to know that freely given, knowledgeable, and informed agreement is the definition of consent. I think it's just common sense, really. And yet, in the state of Texas, where Maureen and Deborah are, they'll apply consent to stealing your oil rights. They'll apply consent to stealing your cattle. But will they apply consent to protecting the sexual sanctity of the people in their state? And I say people instead of women, because in reality, women and men can both be sexually assaulted.
Correct.
And they not only have to protect women, they have to protect men as well.
Yes. Yes.
And one of the reasons that you find that they don't step up and do this is because they're afraid they're going to lose votes.
Yeah. It's a sad state when votes are more important than people's rights.
Exactly. We don't have legislators that have the guts to stand up and do the right thing. And until we do, we're going to continue having sexual assault.
Yes.
I saw a statistic that I think you had 13,000 rape incidents in New South Wales in the last 12 months.
Yeah, that's the number I've got down.
Yeah, in Australia, there actually have been cases of rape by fraud. Now, what Donald Ward did is considered rape by fraud or rape by impersonation. Yes. And there was, back in 2015, there was a case of rape by fraud where the man was actually convicted and sentenced to 4 years. Actually, it was closer to 5 years. And he had pretended to be a woman on the internet. I believe it was through Facebook. And he met somebody who he pretended that he was a woman to. And this fellow wanted to have sex with this woman. And the woman, this fictitious woman, told him, well, in order to have sex with me, I want you to do me a favor and have sex with this guy.
Yeah.
Who, I don't remember what sob story she gave him, but, was unable to attract people, whatever. Yes. And then I'll have sex with you. And so the fellow did as she asked. And then, lo and behold, found out that there was no person that he was talking. There was no female person that he was talking to. He was talking to the person that she wanted him to have sex with. And so he went to the authorities, and they convicted the fellow who had scammed him, whose name is Billy Tamawiwi. Yeah. And it was a very important case in Australia. And they, were very, very adamant that that lying for sexual intercourse is not consent.
Correct.
So, and that was in the Australian Capital Territory in Canberra.
Yeah. Joyce, I'm just going to go to a quick break, and when we come back, I've got one more question, and then we might be just out of time, so just bear with me while we go on a break. And we're back. Hi, Joyce. I've got another question here. Joyce, for our listeners who have only just joined us, I'm talking to Joyce Short, who is a consent crusader, and I've got another question for her. So it's about will the Me Too and Time's Up movements make a difference, do you think, Joyce?
Well, I think that they've done a great deal. Can you hear me? Because I'm getting a little kind of pushback on the line.
I can hear you beautifully. Yeah, I can hear you beautifully.
So the Me Too and Time's Up movements have really focused a glaring light on sexual assault, but we need a solution.
Yes.
Me Too raises the concern, raises the issue. We have a lot of stories that have come forward that I think have raised awareness that sexual assault is a much bigger problem than we ever realized. But they're a movement in need of a... Yeah, some of us have realized it. But yes, we need a solution, and I believe that defining consent properly in our laws is the critical key to that solution. Yeah.
I agree that it's definitely a key to having very clear wording around consent, and making that public knowledge is absolutely necessary.
Right. And there are a few things that I think your listeners can actually do in order to help.
Yes.
And to help consent awareness get laws in place in order to move this issue forward. One of them is, I hope that everyone will read will watch my TED Talk. The name of it is "When Yes Means No: The Key, the truth about consent." And also, I've written a book that has been released recently. In fact, it's currently considered #1 on Amazon for law dictionaries and terminology for new releases.
That's
which
fantastic,
I doubt that they get a lot of
Joyce.
new releases. So it's fantastic that it's #1 for the moment. But it's a very small genre.
I'll put the links for the listeners up in the chat box at the end of the show so that you can all get on and see those very important TED Talks, and the link to Joyce's book as well, because it's very important, very timely that we have this information.
Both the TED Talk and my book were influential in getting the laws submitted in Indiana. And I think that if more legislators read it, more lay people read it and understood it and contacted their legislators, I believe that we could get this law, this understanding into law throughout the world, I hope, because I think that it's absolutely essential that we clearly define that consent is freely given, knowledgeable, and informed agreement. And the other thing that your listeners can do, we're actually Consent Awareness, which is my blog, has created a song contest. So we're calling it a Put Consent to Music contest, and everyone can just get on my webpage, which is consentawareness.net. And just click on the song contest and see the guidelines for it. And I hope that we can get the whole world singing about consent, because I think that would do wonders to get this message across in the world.
Definitely. I've got one more question. The Harvey Weinstein case. How do you think that's going to go?
Well, I hope it goes well. That's for sure. What's that?
Do you think he'll get off?
The laws in New York are kind of peculiar, but we do have likelihood of, based on coercion.
Yes.
Coercion is a fundamental way in which a person can be sexually assaulted in New York.
Yes. Yeah.
And using a power differential to coerce people, I believe, will be seen as coercion under the law. So I'm very hopeful that he'll be that he'll be convicted. Now they're looking for a conviction really on a higher level of or a higher degree of seriousness to the crime, because he's done this to more than one person. And so it becomes actually a crime that could get him a life sentence.
Good.
So it depends. Yeah, it depends on how many cases come forward. There were 3 originally. There are 2 now. I don't know whether that would be seen under the higher type of crime. but I hope that they will, at the very least, find him guilty of sexual assault by coercion.
Yeah. Can you quickly explain? Can you quickly explain to our listeners what you mean by power differential?
A power differential is when you're concerned about what this person can do to you because they have a higher authority, such as your employer, a teacher at school, someone that can make a difference in your life that you would be hard pressed to say no to that person. Incest is a form of power differential. When you're a child and your father molests you, there's just no easy way to say no or to get definitely a power differential. Harvey Weinstein was a very powerful producer. He could destroy people's careers, and for that reason, he misused that power differential in order to conduct sex. He wasn't seducing these people; he was sexually assaulting them.
Yes, most definitely. So, just quickly, I know that you've been working with the legislators in South Carolina and Indiana, and you've had 2 recent bills. Can you tell us about them quickly, Joyce?
The bills in Indiana and South Carolina were submitted obviously by different people. In Indiana, one of the bills was specifically to prohibit the behavior that Donald Ward conducted. The other one was to define consent. However, the bill that was introduced to define consent was patterned after the bill, the legislature here in New York. And the legislature here in New York would not convict Donald Ward any more than they convicted him, any more than he would be convicted in Indiana. So it doesn't do any good for the bill on consent that was introduced to get passed. They need a better bill. They need a better bill. They need a better definition of consent. The one that they're using is inappropriate for handling the crime that was committed in Indiana. Now, in South Carolina, they also submitted a bill on rape by fraud. However, there are 2 kinds of rape by fraud. One is considered fraud in the factum, and that's when you're deceived about the nature of the act itself. So what Larry Nassar did to the gymnastics, the young ladies that were in the U.S. women's gymnastics team, he pretended that what he was doing was medically necessary, and it wasn't. So that would come under fraud in the factum. If in fact he inserted something, he claimed that he would insert something that was a medical instrument and inserted his man parts instead, that also would be a fraud in the factum. Fraud in the inducement is what Donald Ward conducted. He deceived people about the actor, not the action itself. So deceiving a person about the actor is considered fraud in the inducement. The bill in South Carolina that was submitted was actually a fraud in the factum bill, not a fraud in the inducement bill. So I've had a discussion with the legislator in South Carolina, and I believe that there will be some amendments that will be made to that bill before it actually gets passed. We have, I believe, until May 15th, I think, or May 18th is the date that the readings have to be done on the floor of the South Carolina House of Representatives in order to move that legislature along.
Well, thank you, Joyce. We're just about we're just about out of time, my dear. It's been lovely talking to you, and I think I'd like to have you on my program again once I move to our 2-hour time slot, because there's just so much more that I would like to discuss in this realm of consent and sexual assault and how the listeners can be involved. So thank you very much for coming on my show. I will be talking to you again, no doubt. And next week falls on April Friday in Australia, so I'm going to pre-record my show for next week, and at the moment I'll just let you know that after that I've got some great, following our Easter break, we've got some great guests coming up, and just a big thank you to Joyce. Despite having our issues of connectivity, I will put all of Joyce's...
Thank you.
It's been wonderful having you, Joyce, and I'll put those contact details up on our Women for Women chat site so that people can see and contact Joyce and see the wonderful work that she does in the US, and hopefully we might be able to work together to do something in Australia and help change those laws. They're very important. So thank you very much, Joyce. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Toni. Sincerely.
Bye, Joyce.
Bye-bye now.